There is a $2 fix sitting between your kitchen cabinet and your bathroom shower right now that will ease your dog's cough faster than the pill bottle your vet just sent you home with. And here is the part that should actually bother you. It is not because the pill is fake. Doxycycline is a real antibiotic and it does exactly what it is supposed to do. It is because in most cases that pill was never going to touch what is making your dog cough in the first place. And the veterinary profession has known that since at least 2017. Getting the fix right comes down to one number, the exact amount and the timing, and nobody hands you that number at checkout. If your dog just came home from boarding, from the groomer, from daycare, or from an afternoon at the dog park with that dry, honking, almost seal-like cough, you already know the sound. It sounds like something is stuck in his throat. It sounds worse than it usually is. You have probably already heard the word for it, kennel cough. And you have probably already been to the vet, sat in the exam room while he listened to your dog's chest, and walked out 45 minutes later with a bottle of antibiotics, wondering if you did the right thing. Going in was exactly what you should have done. Ruling out something more serious than a common cough is never a wasted trip. What you were not told standing at that front desk is that the professional body vets themselves look to for guidance on this illness has published a formal recommendation that most coughing dogs should not be started on antibiotics at all for at least 10 days. Nobody handed you that page. I want to hand it to you now, along with the $2 thing that helps while you wait. If your dog already finished a full course of antibiotics for this, or if he is on day 3 of a prescription right now, none of what follows means you did anything wrong, and it is not about refusing a vet visit the next time something is wrong with your dog. It is about knowing what a coughing dog's own species has always survived without a prescription pad. So the next time that honking cough starts in your house, and for most dogs there will be a next time, you are not just handing over your card and hoping. My own dog is the reason I went looking for this in the first place. Cooper, an 11-year-old Labrador mix with a gray muzzle and one bad hip, came home from a week of boarding over the holidays with that exact honking cough. 3 days later, it had not let up, so I did what every worried owner does at 11 at night listening to a dog hack in the dark. I called the emergency line. The exam itself ran about $70. By the time the visit ended, I had a bottle of doxycycline, a cough suppressant, and a conversation at the front desk about getting a chest film just to be safe, quoted at somewhere north of $200 more. I said yes to nearly all of it, the way you say yes at 11 at night when your dog will not stop coughing and you just want somebody with a white coat to make it stop. It was not until a comment on one of my earlier videos from a woman whose dog kept coming down with the exact same cough every few months and getting the exact same round of antibiotics every time that I went and read what the veterinary field itself has published on treating this, not a supplement company's blog or a pet food brand's landing page, but an actual clinical guideline written by veterinarians, reviewed by veterinarians, sitting in an academic journal any of them can pull up in 30 seconds. What it said explained a lot about the $270 Cooper and I had just walked out with. I will admit something here because it is the same thing that woman in the comments admitted, and it is probably true for you too. Standing at that counter with a coughing dog, I was not thinking clearly enough to ask a single hard question. I was thinking about the sound he had made at 2 in the morning and about the last dog I owned before I understood any of this, who I lost young to something a vet actually did catch in time. So when the text says antibiotics, you say yes because saying no feels like gambling with a dog you cannot afford to lose. That instinct is not stupid. It is exactly the instinct a coughing dog is supposed to trigger in you. And it is also the same instinct that makes just to be safe such an easy thing to sell. It also sent me back a long way to a winter I spent on the Mongolian steppe before I understood any of this, back when I was young enough to think a coughing dog was automatically an emergency. I was staying with a herding family in Arkhangai province through what they call a dzud, a killing winter, the kind where the temperature does not climb back above freezing for months at a stretch, and a bad one can wipe out 1/3 of a family's entire herd. Their dogs slept outside with the livestock through all of it, guarding against wolves and cold that would put an ordinary house dog in an emergency clinic within a night. That winter, half the camp's working dogs came down with the same rattling, honking cough that had Cooper up half the night, one after another, passed dog to dog the way it always spreads. Through the air, through shared water bowls, through simple proximity in close quarters. There was no clinic within 100 miles, no prescription pad, just a herder named Monkbat, his dog Bars stretched out by the dung fire with his ribs working, and a clay jar of honey Monkbat kept for exactly this. Monkbat did not have antibiotics and would not have wanted them if he did. He mixed a spoonful of honey into warm water for Bars morning and night and kept him close enough to the fire that the air staying against his fur stayed thick and warm instead of the dry, biting cold sitting just outside the felt walls. I remember the smell of that jar more than almost anything else from that winter. Dung smoke and wet wool and the sweet edge of the honey jar sitting open on a shelf by the door, and Bars working his ribs against the felt floor every few minutes with that same honking cough Cooper would have decades later on the other side of the planet. The cough has to run its course, Monkbat told me, through the little Mongolian I had picked up by then, and a lot of pointing at his own chest. The honey just makes the running easier. Bars was back out working the herd inside of 2 weeks, same as most of the other camp dogs who got the same treatment. Nobody gave any of them a pill. Nobody needed to, because what those dogs had was almost never a bacterial infection to begin with, and modern veterinary medicine actually agrees with Monkbat on that in writing, whether or not it tells you so across the counter. What was actually in that jar is not exotic honey, warm, moist air, and time. That is genuinely most of it, which might be why nobody has built a $200 business model around explaining it to you. But Monkbat never once told me the amount because a working dog on the step got a rough spoonful and nobody was measuring. Your dog is going to need something a lot more precise than that, and I will give it to you exactly because too little does nothing, and there are real reasons certain dogs should not get it at all. Raw honey is naturally thick and mildly antibacterial on its own, and when a dog swallows a spoonful, it coats the back of an irritated throat the same way it coats yours when you have a cold, cutting down on the raw, scratchy trigger that sets off cough after cough after cough. Warm, humid air does something similar from the other direction. It loosens the mucus sitting in an already inflamed airway, so when the cough does come, it actually clears something instead of repeating uselessly against dry, irritated tissue that never gets a chance to calm down. Neither one kills a virus, and here is the part that matters. Neither one needs to, because in the overwhelming majority of coughing dogs, there is no bacteria there to kill in the first place. Your dog's own immune system is already handling that on its own timeline the same way yours does with an ordinary chest cold. Honey and steam are not a cure. They are what makes the 2 or 3 weeks a dog's body typically needs to clear this on its own a lot more bearable, for him and for you. This is not some fringe claim invented by a channel that gets sponsored by honey. People have used it on a cough since long before anybody understood what a virus even was, in nearly every culture that ever kept bees, and it is one of the few folk remedies that modern human medicine still quietly endorses without much argument. The World Health Organization itself lists honey as a legitimate option for soothing a cough in people ahead of some over-the-counter syrups. Dogs are not people, the safe amounts are different, and I will give you the exact ones, but the mechanism holding a cough down does not change species. The cough itself is not actually the enemy here either, and it changes how you think about the whole thing once you see it that way. A cough is the airway's own cleanup crew, clearing irritation and loose mucus out of the way. Silencing it completely with a strong suppressant, the way that bottle in Cooper's bag was designed to do, can leave more junk sitting in the airway longer in some cases, not less. What honey and steam do instead is calm the trigger without shutting off the mechanism, so the cough gets less frequent and less violent, but the airway still gets to do its job. That is a meaningfully different goal than the one printed on a suppressant label, and nobody explains the difference at the exam room either. So if honey and steam and a couple of patient weeks handle most of what walks through a vet's door with a cough, why did Cooper and I leave that clinic with a prescription and a bill closer to $300 before the chest film was even mentioned as optional? Part of the answer is the disease itself, and it is worth naming honestly rather than pretending it is one simple bug. What everyone calls kennel cough is really a cluster the field calls canine infectious respiratory disease complex, and it can come from more than a dozen different bacteria and viruses working alone or stacked on top of each other. That is also why the Bordetella vaccine so many boarding kennels require at intake, the one you probably signed a form for and paid a separate fee on, does not stop every case. It targets one bacterial piece of a much larger complex, so a fully vaccinated dog can still come home from boarding hacking 2 days later, which is exactly what happened with Cooper, fully vaccinated, sick anyway. I remember standing at that boarding kennel's front desk the week before, signing the form, asking the girl behind the counter if the shot meant he could not catch anything there. She said that's what it's for, and moved on to the next customer, which is technically true and almost entirely misleading at the same time. None of that is a conspiracy, just a messier illness than the sign on the boarding kennel wall makes it sound, and a much less complete vaccine than the intake form implies. What is not messy, what is not a guess, is what happens next in the exam room. A huge share of general veterinary practices in this country, including national chains like Banfield, VCA, and Blue Pearl, are now owned by the same handful of corporations and private equity groups that also own pet food brands and pet pharmaceutical companies, and those companies track visit volume and revenue per visit the same way any corporate retail chain tracks a store's numbers. A coughing dog who gets a spoon of honey and a let's watch him for a week does not generate a recheck appointment or a pharmacy sale. A coughing dog who gets antibiotics, a cough suppressant, and a follow-up film does both. I am not accusing the veterinarian who saw Cooper of sitting in a back room twirling a mustache. Most of them went into this job specifically to help dogs, and most of them are good at it. But I think about that incentive every time I picture Cooper's chart getting pulled up on the same screen that also tracks how many recheck slots the clinic booked that month. The business structure they now work inside of was not built by them, and it rewards a very particular kind of visit. And it is not the visit where the vet hands you a spoon and sends you home. The document that turns that suspicion into something you can check yourself is not hard to find. In 2017, the International Society for Companion Animal Infectious Diseases, the real professional body veterinarians turn to for guidance on this specific illness, published formal antimicrobial use guidelines for treating respiratory disease in dogs and cats. It ran in the Journal of Veterinary Internal Medicine, and any working vet in the country can pull it up for free in about 30 seconds. Sitting inside it in plain English is this sentence: the majority of cases of CRDC are currently believed to be viral in etiology, and so antimicrobial administration is often not indicated. It goes further than that single line too. Even when a vet suspects a bacterial infection might be layering on top of the virus, the guideline recommends a full 10-day observation period, watching and waiting, during which antibiotics should not be started at all unless the dog develops a fever, goes lethargic, stops eating, or is clearly getting worse instead of better. 10 days of watching is the actual published professional recommendation for most of these dogs, not silence, not a shrug, but a specific numbered window most owners are never once told exists. Because let's wait 10 days and see does not fill a recheck slot the way a prescription does. That guideline is not buried or classified. It sits in an open academic journal, free to read, written by the same profession that treated your dog. It is just not profitable to read it out loud across the counter, the same way it was not profitable for that girl at the boarding kennel desk to explain that the vaccine she charged me for only covers part of what Cooper could catch there. And when I finally sit down and work out the exact dose that made the 10 days bearable for him, that number matters as much as the guideline itself. Neither one alone would have gotten us through it. So if your dog is coughing right now, or if you have got an old dog at home who seems to catch everything that comes through the dog park these days because his immune system is not what it used to be, here is what actually matters this week. You do not need to fight with your vet, and you should not skip the visit that confirms it is kennel cough and not something more serious, because a persistent cough can also mean heart disease, a collapsing trachea, or the beginning of pneumonia, and only an exam and a stethoscope can rule those out. Honey will not touch any of those. What you do need is to know the 10-day guideline exists, so that if antibiotics get offered on day 1 for a dog who is otherwise bright, eating normally, and acting like himself, you can ask the one question that matters: is this the kind of cough where we watch and wait first? An older dog is exactly where this matters most, and it is also where a worried owner is most likely to say yes to everything offered without asking. If your dog is past 8 or 9, has already got a heart murmur on his chart, or is one of the flat-faced breeds, the honey and the steam still apply, but the 10-day observation window is not automatically his. Guidelines built around dogs with typical immune systems bend for the ones without one, and a vet who wants to move faster on an older or higher risk dog is not necessarily upselling you. He may genuinely be right to. What actually separates a good call from an upsell is not the antibiotics themselves, but whether anyone ever explains why this particular dog does or does not fit the wait and see window, instead of reaching for the prescription pad as the automatic first move for every dog who walks in coughing. That is the question I wish I had asked with Cooper. Once I knew what I know now, I finished the antibiotics he had already started, because you do not quit a course halfway through once it is running. But I stopped the cough suppressant early and leaned hard into the honey and the steam alongside everything else. He was back to normal, off-leash, chasing the mail truck down the driveway within about 16 days, though there were still a couple of rough nights in the middle of that stretch where the cough seemed to be getting worse instead of better, and I sat up second-guessing the whole plan. Monkbat's dog bars did the same thing in 14 on nothing but honey, warmth, and patience, out on a step with no clinic for 100 miles in any direction. Neither of us ever needed that chest film. That commenter's dog, the one who kept getting the same round of antibiotics every few months, turned out to have the same story once she started asking the question instead of just nodding along. Her next vet visit, she asked whether it was the kind of cough worth watching first. The vet actually agreed, no antibiotics that round, and the cough cleared in 12 days on honey and a humidifier alone. The illness was the same both times. What changed was that she knew to ask. Now here is the number that decides whether any of this helps your dog or does nothing at all, because the amount and the timing matter a great deal more than the ingredient itself. For the honey, you dose by your dog's size, and you give it 2 to 3 times a day for as long as the cough is running, not just once as a one-time treat. A small dog under about 20 pounds gets a quarter teaspoon. A medium dog gets half a teaspoon. A large dog, 70 pounds and up, gets a full teaspoon. Room temperature honey only, never hot, either straight off the spoon or stirred into a little warm water the way Monkbat did it for bars. Raw, unpasteurized, locally sourced honey works better than the clear processed kind on most grocery shelves, and anything from a farmer's market or a local apiary does the job, usually for less than $5 a jar, that lasts the whole illness. 2 things here are not optional. Never give honey to a puppy under 12 months old, because a young puppy's gut is not developed enough to safely handle the rare botulism spores that can turn up in raw honey. The same reason human doctors say never give honey to a baby. Skip it entirely for a diabetic dog too, since it is straight sugar. For every other dog, that dose, that often, for the 2 to 3 weeks a case like this typically runs its course. For the steam, run a hot shower and sit in the closed bathroom with your dog for 10 to 15 minutes, not in the water itself, just in the steam filling the room 2 or 3 times a day while the cough is at its worst. If you own an actual humidifier, running it in the room where your dog sleeps does the same job around the clock without you having to sit on the bathroom floor. One real exception worth knowing: if you have got a flat-faced breed, a bulldog, a pug, a boxer, skip the closed bathroom steam session specifically. Their airways are already narrower than a normal dog's, and the extra humidity in a small closed space can occasionally make their breathing work harder rather than easier. A plain humidifier in the sleeping area is the safer version for those dogs. Keep him away from other dogs while this runs its course too, not just out of courtesy at the dog park. A dog is typically contagious for close to 2 weeks after the cough starts, sometimes longer, and it spreads through the air and through shared bowls and toys just as easily as it spread through Monkbot's Camp Dog the dog. Separate bowls, skip the dog park and the groomer until he is clearly better, and give it those same 2 weeks before you consider him safe to be back around other dogs. Roughly, this is what those 2 to 3 weeks look like, so you are not checking his throat every hour wondering if it is working. The first 2 or 3 days are usually the loudest, the cough coming in fits. sometimes hard enough that it ends in a gag or a retch that looks worse than it is. By day 5 or 6, most dogs are coughing less often, even if it has not stopped. By day 10, the same day the guideline flags is the point to reassess if you have not already, a dog on the honey and the steam should be clearly better than he was on day 1, coughing occasionally instead of constantly, still eating, still himself. If day 10 comes and he is flat, worse, or off his food instead of better, that is exactly the moment to go back in. Not because the honey failed, but because that is precisely the checkpoint the guideline itself tells a vet to reassess at. The plan was never honey forever. It was the first move with a real specific day to check back in if it is not doing its job. And here is the line Monkbot drew without ever once owning a stethoscope, the line that matters more than either remedy. A dog who is still eating, still greeting you at the door, still coughing but otherwise himself, that is an ordinary cough running its ordinary course. A dog who goes off his food, gets quiet and will not get up, spikes a fever, or starts breathing hard and fast even while resting, that dog has crossed into something a honey jar cannot fix, and he needs a vet that same day, not next week. The herders on that step buried more animals to a hard winter than any of them ever wanted to. They knew exactly where the line sat between a bad week and a dog in real trouble, and they never once needed a diagnostic film to know it. Dogs coughed through winters at their owners' feet for as long as there have been dogs and owners, long before anybody invented a 45-minute exam slot to bill against it. Kennel cough is not new and it is not rare. It is one of the most common things a dog will ever catch in his life, and for most of that long history, it simply ran its course by a fire, next to someone who loved the dog enough to wait it out with him. Somewhere along the way, an ordinary, mostly self-limiting respiratory bug got quietly turned into a guaranteed recheck appointment because a frightened owner with a coughing dog at 11 at night will say yes to almost anything that promises to make it stop faster. None of that makes you a bad owner. Being scared enough to call the vet at 11 at night is exactly what a good one does. What nobody handed you was the one page that would have told you most of what happened next was always going to happen anyway, prescription or not. A system that runs on the assumption you will never ask does not need a villain twirling a mustache to do damage. It just needs a guideline sitting in an open journal that answers the question the moment you finally ask it. Monkbot never read that guideline. He had no reason to. He just watched enough coughing dogs come through enough winters to know in his bones that most of them get better on their own if you keep them warm and give the body time to finish what it started. It took a published, peer-reviewed document for the rest of us to catch up to what he already knew by the fire. Cooper is fine now. Older, grayer around the muzzle, a little slower getting up some mornings, but fine. Whatever is coughing at your feet tonight on the floor beside you right now is very likely going to be fine too on almost exactly the same timeline, honey or not. Tell me his breed and his age in the comments and whatever got sent home with you the last time he was sick. Since I go looking through those for the next guideline nobody handed somebody at a counter. And if you are done paying full price to be told what a jar of honey and 2 patient weeks could have told you for free, subscribe. The ISC-8 guideline was sitting in that journal the whole time Cooper was coughing. I would rather go find the next one before your dog needs it than after.